Good evening and welcome to Face to Face. Tonight, we begin a series on social issues. We're going to be talking about incarceration, immigration, homelessness, and human trafficking. Immigration in particular is a hot button topic nowadays. And I don't know what your thoughts are on immigration, but it really goes beyond whether you're a Democrat or a Republican. Danny Montanez, our guest tonight, a theologian and the founder of the Mygration Conference, takes a biblical view of immigration and connects it to God's heart for the foreigner and the sojourner. Are you ready to hear what he says? Let's get into it. Danny, thank you so much for coming on the program. I'm excited for our conversation. It has been so long since I last saw you. Yeah. And I think the last time you were at CLJ was when you were the young adults pastor. That's right. But a lot has happened in your life. So kind of tell us where God has taken you since you left CLJ.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, first off, thank you for the invitation to be part of this show. It's an honor to be here and to chat with you about this as well. Yeah, it's been quite a ride, quite a wild time. So in 2020, I started my doctoral program at Boston University. I've been there coming on 5 years now. I've been doing a PhD there in theology, ethics, and philosophy, focusing on the theology of migration and immigration. So have been very busy with that. I also got married during that time to Paula Suarez. Love her.
Whom you met here,
I met here. Yes, when I was with the young adult ministry. She was a youth ministry, and the rest is history. So we're coming up on our 4-year anniversary now.
Wow.
It's crazy the amount of time.
Congratulations.
That has passed. It's been a lot has happened since then. God has been good. God has been opening doors for both of us, and just advancing our work and our ministry. So
that's really good to hear. I'm so glad. It's always wonderful to see the trajectory that God takes different people on, right? We all have our own path that God is taking us through, and yours has been a wonderful and a beautiful story that it's been a pleasure to watch. Because even though you weren't immediately in our vicinity here at CLJ, we're Facebook friends, and so I knew of all these things that have been happening in your life, which I'm so grateful to God and wonderful that they have happened to you. I wanted to ask you, Danny, in particular, about the immigration and the Mygration Conference, which you are very involved in. And please, just kind of take us back, how the idea of just immigration having become such an important and a passionate issue for you. So if you could talk to us a little bit about that.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'd say my passion and interest in this particular area started back in 2015. I moved up here to Boston in 2014 to study at Gordon Conwell, where I did my M.Div. And in 2015, I had the opportunity to take a class at Harvard Divinity School with a professor there named David Carrasco. And the name of the course was Human Migration in the Mexico-U.S. Borderlands. And in taking that course, it was actually the first time that I began to reflect on the stories of migrants, of immigrants at the border, across the United States, as well as abroad globally. And as I began to read the stories of people's journeys to the United States, and what it means to live in the United States as documented or undocumented, I came to realize that the stories in which I was reading hit closer to home than I realized. Very close family members of mine went through very similar experiences as the ones that I was reading in this course, yet they were things that were never really explored or talked about. So this course sparked my curiosity in learning more about this, about my family's story. At the time, my grandparents were part of that story, and I wanted to learn more. I wanted to learn, why did they come to the United States at such a young age? But when I was younger, I couldn't speak Spanish that well because I'm a second generation Latino, so there was always that generational gap. And for me, I came to this realization moment of wanting to really connect with my heritage, with my family. So I went through this journey of learning Spanish. I worked very hard, and my Spanish is probably a million times better than it used to be. But I was able to spend some time and get to know my grandparents a little bit more and have these conversations. And all of these personal experiences began to lead to questions about, well, what does the Bible say about this particular topic? What is, how can I understand this from a faith perspective? What is God's heart towards migrants, towards refugees, towards people who are on the move within this world? And it was during a time where the conversation of immigration, it's a very politically contentious word. It's very charged.
Hot button issue.
Yes. Hot button issue, very politically charged. And I just wanted to see faithful engagement on the topic. Before coming to the conversation from a political perspective, let's just start with the Bible. Let's just start with Scripture. As Christians, Scripture should be the guiding source for our life and the way in which we view the world. So the desire for the conference originally was to do just that. Let's start with the Bible, see what it says on this particular reality and this social issue, and see how we can begin to apply these truths into our world today.
Yeah. Well, since you're talking about the Bible and the stories in the Bible that touch on this topic, can you just tell the audience and walk us through those specific stories that to you sort of exemplify the sort of the migrant community?
Yeah, absolutely. So when in reading the scriptures, and oftentimes people don't read it through the particular lens of migration, of the movement of peoples or movement in general. But as I began this journey, I began to discover that the Bible is full of stories of migration, from Genesis to Revelation. Migration is a human experience, and we use this term when we talk about immigration. We begin with the word human migration, because in a sense it's an opportunity to take a step back and understand it as a larger human experience, something that each and every person engages in some type of way. The conditions from which people move from one place to another vary and differ from person to person based off of what's happening in their particular life circumstance. But the act of movement itself is something that is an intrinsic part of what it means to be human. And because it's part of what it means to be human, it's also part of the way in which God designed us to be people who are moving up. One of the places where I begin this conversation is Genesis 1:28, which said, God blessed them and said, be fruitful, multiply, fill the earth, and subdue it. And in this call to fill the earth, oftentimes when people read the creation mandate, Genesis 1:28, they understand it as the call to reproduce, the call to take command and dominion over the earth. But there's also this call to movement. In the call to fill the earth, God is calling humanity to move. Right. And when we see this take place in Genesis, it's this command from God to move is predicated by three important words, which is God blessed them. And this tells us that God's original vision for human movement in this world was something that was good, something that was pure, something that was part of their missional purpose here on this earth. When sin comes into this world, we see the ways in which this reality is tarnished. The people are no longer moving out of God's command as something that is positive, but people begin to be displaced. We begin to see human displacement from Adam and Eve being kicked out of the Garden of Eden to Cain being identified as a restless wanderer on this earth, and in beginning to see how the nature of migration changes in Scripture, we also begin to see how God still uses migration to redeem his missional purposes. So one particular example is Abraham. Abram in Genesis 12, when God calls Abraham to go from your country to a land you don't know, and I will bless you and I will make you into a great nation, and all the other nations of this earth will be blessed. what many people don't realize is that that command that God had given to Abram was a call to move. It was a call to migrate, to live the life of a migrant, of an immigrant in this world. And in many ways, the establishment of God's people, the people of Israel, was predicated upon Abraham's decision to obey God, to live a life on the move. So these are just a few examples in which we can begin to develop a theological understanding of how God uses movement for his redemptive purposes in this world. But there's so much more to be explored, and part of what we do in the conference is explore all of these intricacies.
And so, as we're talking about immigration and it being, the theology around immigration, and that it was God who really initiated or gave that command to be fruitful and multiply, how are we to view, looking at it from a more contemporary perspective as Christians, how are we to view immigration and how are we to view the people who immigrate from other countries? And, maybe I'm moving a little bit into the political sphere and some of the stuff that's happening right now, but maybe you may have some idea on how to help us as Christians view, immigration and view migrants and view refugees, and what is our role even as people when we encounter immigrants from other countries. What does the Bible say about people on the move and how we are to treat them?
Yeah. That is a great question, a very good question. And I think the first place in which I would start is understanding not only immigrants, but every human being is made in the image of God. We carry this intrinsic value, this intrinsic worth of who we are as bearers of God's image. And because of that, something that each and every person deserves by their own nature is dignity, is respect, is basic human rights. These fundamental principles of what it means to care for one another. When we look at the Christian scriptures, there's many places in which God calls his people to care for migrants and people who are displaced. I think Leviticus, I believe it's chapter 19, where God tells the people of Israel, when a foreigner resides among you, you must treat them as one of your own. For you were once foreigners in the land of Egypt. And what God is calling the people of Israel at that time is to care for others, because you yourselves were once in that position. You yourselves were once in a position where you were displaced, where you did not have a home. The people of Israel were wandering in the desert for over 40 years without a place to call home. And oftentimes within our world, as time passes, as the years go on, there's always a tendency to have this type of spiritual amnesia of forgetting in which where one came from, the struggles, the experiences, and God is calling his people to remember that, to remember their own struggles, regardless of what is happening around them during that time. The Christian call, the Christian commitment, the social responsibility from a Christian perspective is to care for the stranger, the foreigner, the widow. And we also see this theme in different parts of Scripture as well, in Romans 13 or 14, where it says to show hospitality to the stranger. One of my favorite examples is just the idea of any time that an angel appears, oftentimes the people are judged according to how they respond to that particular angel. And if they respond to them, if they welcome them into their home and care for them, then often God's favor is upon them. But in places like Sodom and Gomorrah, when we see that they were not being hospitable to the angels and were seeking to harm and abuse them, we see judgment came upon them in that type of way. So I think there are certain biblical principles when looking through the grand narrative of Scripture that we can turn to. The last thing I'll say is it's important for us to understand Scripture from a whole, from a larger lens or perspective. Oftentimes, when it comes to these conversations, people tend to pick different verses from one place or another to prove a particular political point or political stance. That's not what we seek to do. We seek to understand the narrative of migration through the grand narratives of Scripture: creation, fall, redemption, and restoration, and how God is moving in the lives of people, and what is God's posture, what is God's position towards these people. And as people who are called to be like Christ, we also are to emulate him in that same way.
Yeah, and that's really the call on us Christians, right? Is to love. I mean, it goes back to the great commandment: love God, love neighbor, and neighbor is anyone. It goes beyond the sort of the geographical boundaries of who might be your neighbor, down the street or your family or whatever. It really is that love of Jesus and showing people that love of Jesus, whether they be immigrants, refugees, the person that you don't see eye to eye with, your enemy, as Jesus
absolutely.
calls as well, your enemy. And so I really love, how you're painting that picture, that really God's heart and the biblical story itself really is a story of movement and of people moving from one place to another. I mean, that's my story. I am an immigrant into this country. Your grandfather was an immigrant to this country, and so many of us, our forefathers, generations ago, came here, or maybe they might have gone another place and then come here. And so it's really a story close to our heart, and it's close to God's heart as well. So I love that. Thank you, Danny, for kind of, setting that up for us. And so let's turn our attention to the Mygration Conference. You started that in 2019, and the very first one was here at Lion of Judah. It's the kickoff to this conference that's been going on now for, was it 5 years now?
We're coming up on our 6th annual conference.
Your 6th annual conference. Congratulations.
Thank you.
And so tell us the impetus. Obviously, this is an issue that's important to you, but how is your conference different from perhaps a conference on immigration, maybe set up by like a political leaning conference talk? How is your conference different, the Mygration Conference?
Absolutely. That's a great question. Thank you for asking it. The way in which we approach our conference, we are very nonpartisan in the way in which we approach this. So the world around us will continue to move, to continue to shift. Political leanings will lead in different directions. What we feel called to do is just continue to remain faithful in our biblical call to love our neighbors, as you said a lot, love God and love others. So part of the ways in which we do that is by equipping pastors, lay leaders, parishioners of churches, as well as educators and scholars with certain tools and resources so that they can begin to learn what it means to better love their neighbors and serve their immigrant communities. A lot of our work is done by partnership. We believe in lifting up others. So if you go to our conference, it will not be a specifically Mygration Christian Conference, but you'll find a lot of different organizations, a lot of faith-based advocacy organizations. I think of World Relief, who has done refugee resettlements for over 80 years, and they started actually right down here down the road at Park Street Church. And they've been doing work, so we'll be having speakers from that organization coming to share about the work they're doing and how we as individuals can get involved in this work. We also have organizations like Immigrant Connection that actually helps churches start legal resource centers in their local congregations to serve their communities. And what a testimony that is to the community of a church being a place where people can be welcome. I mean, Lion of Judah knows this very well
Right.
because you guys were the OGs, the originals.
Alpha,
with the
right?
Hensa Alpha. They have been doing
Yeah.
amazing and tremendous work. They've also been a very
Yeah.
much an integral part of our
Yeah.
conference as well, and just providing people with these
Yeah.
different resources and to begin to think about it from the perspective of their faith.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
That's really great. And now your conference is coming up, and give us kind of a little bit of a sneak peek into what people, the date, and then maybe some speakers, and tell us a little bit about the upcoming conference.
Yeah, absolutely. So the conference will be taking place October 4th and 5th of 2024 this year. I think we're probably about a month and a half away. We're coming up on that point. It's going to be taking place at Gordon Conwell Theological Seminary in South Hamilton, Massachusetts. It'll be a 2-day conference, and the focus on this year for this year's conference is understanding how the Christian tradition has responded towards migrants and refugees historically in the past, throughout church history. What is the kind of work that is being done right now in the present? And how can we together begin to envision a future in which we can continue to care for migrants in this way? So our conference is unique. We bring together, our speakers consist of pastors, of scholars, and of community leaders. We believe that in order to really transform our society, to transform the narrative, we need to move away from the particular silos in which we oftentimes exist. And I believe that the scholar has so much to learn from the pastor and from the community leader. The pastors can learn so much from the scholars and the community leaders, and the community leaders need the pastors and the scholars. And I believe that when all of these people come together, and when we learn from these people together, what is produced out of that can be so much greater than what one particular person can do on their own. And I think in that way we can begin to change the narrative within our larger society to a more positive, to a more proactive response. A lot of the time people focus on problems, and we want to help people be part of the solution. And in that way, I believe we're going to change it. So some of the speakers that we'll have, we're very excited for one of our keynote speakers. His name is Dr. Justo Gonzalez. He'll be joining us with his wife, Catherine Gonzalez Justo, and Catherine are amazing theologians. Justo is probably one of the most renowned theologians within our world today of our time. He's written over 100 books. I think he's like at 150 now or something like that. But very well respected and loved theologian of the Latino community. So he'll be coming to speak to us about the story of Christianity in relationship to migration. So he has this famous 2-volume book called The Story of Christianity, where he outlines the history of the church. And he'll be presenting that to us through the lens of migration. We'll also have another keynote speaker named Daniel Yang. He is the National Director for Churches of Welcome for World Relief, and he'll be speaking to us about how the immigrant church is, in a sense, saving evangelicalism. Oftentimes we hear within mainstream media and society that the church is dying, that evangelicalism is fading, but in reality it's growing. And the place where it's growing is at the margins. It's growing within the immigrant churches. So he'll be presenting to us some very interesting data, statistics, facts about that, and help us to think about how we can envision the future of the church in that way. We also have Monique Tu Win from, she is the executive director of the Mayor's Office for Immigrant Advancement here in Boston. She'll be speaking to us about the work that they're doing. And a lot of other great people, Linda Priest, Glenn Butner, and Aida Pilarski, Christian Hare, a lot of great people who will be coming to speak with us. So it'll be a great time.
Awesome. Thank you. So be sure to join Danny and these wonderful speakers October 4th and 5th. At Gordon Conwell Theological Seminary. But before we bring off, I want to ask you, are there some practical ways in which the Mygration Christian Conference seeks to work with immigrant communities, or is that really work that that you partner with community activists and other people who are actually doing the work, or is that part of the conference?
Yeah, yeah. Thank you for that. So, in many ways, Mygration Christian Conference serves as a connection point for a lot of people who are just asking the question, "What can I do? What can I do to help? How can I serve in a type of way?" And in many ways, this conference serves as a meeting place, as a meeting point where people can come and learn about how they can get involved. We do provide some of our own material. We have a book called The Church of Mygration, which myself and a good friend of mine co-edited together, Church of Mygration, Theological Vision for the People of God, which is a great resource for churches who are interested in beginning to have this conversation with their local congregations. It can be used for a Bible study or for a small group book club in that type of way. We're also in the process of developing an online course right now, which should be releasing actually the day of the conference. So we're very excited for that. So I shared a little bit about kind of the biblical and theological narrative of immigration within Scripture, and we're really going to be expanding on that more. And a lot of what we do as well is bringing the conference to local churches as well. So for congregations who want to have this conversation with their local congregation, we offer trainings with local churches on Saturdays or Fridays or whatever works for them to begin to help people think about this and in that way. So yeah, we offer our own types of trainings as well, but we also seek to elevate others in that work as well.
Yeah, and bringing people together who are doing the same work, sort of sharing ideas or things that they're doing, in their individual communities. I think that's really great. I'd love to get your thoughts, sort of on immigration and the refugee crisis, or any of those things that are currently happening, because this topic is it's very much a topic that is present with us. And I wanted to kind of get your thoughts on kind of what's happening around the world, right? And the displacement of so many people around the world that are ending up in other places. Do you see, because sometimes when I look at it, I feel like as terrible as it is for people to be displaced from their homes, either because of war or because of some other reason, I see kind of God's hand in all of it as well. Somehow God is moving. And so I don't know kind of what your philosophy or your own personal ideas around how much of that is happening right now in the world.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, the first thing that I'll say is that human migration is at an all-time high. As far as, and oftentimes when people talk about immigration, it is a catch-all term for a lot of different realities, for people who are undocumented, for people who are refugees, for people who are asylum seekers, for people who are international migrants forcibly displaced from their homes. There's so many different things in which this particular term encompasses, which is why we seek to take a step back and refer to it from human migration at a larger lens. But I mean, we're seeing just with the instability that's existing within our world today. I think in 2023, the Migration Policy Institute estimated that there are over 108 million people who are forcibly displaced from their homelands. 108 million. I think as regarding with international migrants, I think it goes over 200 million. And that goes beyond just people who are facing particular dangers within their homelands. But I mean, we see this across borders in the world. It's not just the U.S.-Mexico border where this is a reality. We see with the political and economic instability in Venezuela. We see with the surrounding countries, Colombia and Peru and Brazil. We see a massive influx of people moving from there. We see with the war in Ukraine and Russia. We see just those types of things with Israel and with Palestine. We see these things as the way in which society paints them as like these large political issues, but the impacts and the repercussions of this are people who are losing their homes, people who are forced to flee and to find a new place to live. So it's happening everywhere. And for Christians, I think it's important to be ready to respond to these things. I think for myself, what I come to realize is that God is often found in the midst of these difficult and terrible situations. If you speak with people who are immigrants who have been forcibly displaced, oftentimes when they arrive to their destinations, they give thanks to God. They say how God has been present with them in those struggles. And oftentimes they face brutal realities, very difficult conditions, things that you would never wish upon anybody, like terrible things. And I think for us as the church, we have the opportunity to meet them in that place and show them the love of God and show them the hands of Christ in the midst of that and show them that God is with them. And yeah, just show them a little bit of God's love in that. And I think that's part of what our call as Christians is to be in this world.
Danny, thank you so much. I think you ended it on a perfect point for us, and how you have just taken us through the beautiful biblical story and connection of immigration and God's heart for that original movement of humans, right? Human immigration, as you mentioned. And so I thank you for joining us. I thank you for taking the time to teach us. And I hope that you, as you've been watching, that you have learned something. I pray that in particular, what you have come away with is the fact that the immigrant story is a biblical story, and that we can see God's heart in this story of movement and people moving throughout the world, and what our call as Christians is, and how our posture ought to be for others who are displaced, who are new to a country, and who may need you to show them the love of God. Thank you so much for tuning in. I will see you next time.